Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this live reading of The Best We Could Do, followed by Q&A with Author Thi Bui. I'm Julie Volker-Morris. I'm the faculty fellow for the Common Reading program here at the university, and we are very pleased to have Thi with us today. Common Reading at the UO is really a year-long conversation around a shared book, and so this is one event, one moment in that continuing conversation. And so I'm really glad you're here to be part of that. Through this program, we're building community, enhancing curriculum, engaging research, both contemporarily and historically, of issues that are relevant to students, staff, and faculty. A few things you may not know about Common Reading is that the program is in its 5th year as a campus-wide initiative. At least 60 classes have or are currently reading this year's book. There's a reach to almost 2,400 students through those 60 courses. And of first years who responded to an orientation survey, 73% they had read all or at least portions of the book by the middle of fall term. Professional staff from Advising Advancement, the Office of Innovation and Research, and many others connected to the OA Council are reading and discussing these books to enhance their work with students. So it's not just students and faculty in the classroom, but staff who are using it as part of professional development. And I think all of these numbers really represent the wonderful growth of our program, and we're looking forward to further developing our programming in the future. This morning I'm going to keep the introduction fairly straightforward. Many of you have been at multiple events with Thi already this week. We've had a public conversation, a book signing and artist reception, some meals, an exhibition tour that we just came from, and many other things. And so you know what great conversations we've already been having around this book. This morning's event features, as I said, an interactive reading from the UO Common Reading 2018-19 book selection, The Best We Could Do, by our guest Thi Bui. And there is audience participation, but for most of you, you should be pleased. People have already been designated to read, so don't worry. But Thi may ask you to do some other things. A bit about Thi. Thi Bui was born in Vietnam 3 months before the end of the Vietnamese-American War and came to the United States in 1978 as part of the wave of refugees from Southeast Asia. Her book, The Best We Could Do, has been selected as common reads at other institutions, including UCLA, University of California, Santa Barbara, and the University of Chicago, among others. And the book has made several best of lists, including Bill Gates' top 5 picks for 2017. Bui is also the author of A Different Pond, an award-winning picture book by the poet Bao Phi. She is currently researching a work of graphic nonfiction about individuals selected for deportation by ICE. She taught high school in New York City and was a founding teacher of the Oakland International High School, which was the first public high school in California for recent immigrants and English learners. She's also a lecturer at the California College of the Arts Comics MFA program. So again, Thi will lead us in a live reading, and then we'll open the floor to particularly student questions in the audience, but I do want to turn it over to Maddie and May to say, whichever you want, to say a few words. So.
Great, just a few words. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Maddie Doe, and I'm one of the co-directors for the Vietnamese Student Association here on campus.
Hi, I'm May, and I'm the other co-director.
We just wanted to thank Thi and Julie and Common Reading for this time and for this partnership. And just a little bit about our student organization. We're a student-led program that aims to raise awareness about the Vietnamese and Vietnamese American cultures throughout campus and the Pacific Northwest. So it's really an honor to be having this time and to have this be the Common Reading book for this year.
So Thi's book, The Best We Could Do, has been heavily ingrained in our vision for this year, and for many reasons. Seeing Thi's determination to embolden humanity and empathy in her work has inspired us to think deeply not only about our ancestry, but also, futurity and possibility. So, like questions like, who are we? Are we the end result of our losses, or are we more than that? And what kind of legacy do we want to leave behind for future generations? So these questions have prompted us to reflect on the sacrifices and compromises that have marked and will continue to mark the gap that stands between us and a sustainable future for our global community. And as peoples with interconnected histories of subjugation, but likewise survival and resilience, we have to constantly remind ourselves that we are active agents in how our past defines our future. But hypotheticals aside, I do know that The Best We Could Do has sparked an unprecedented dialogue between two generations. It has mobilized a collective of immigrants and children of immigrants to come together to commemorate and grow from hardship, to build a diverse yet compassionate community based upon our differences, and to stand in solidarity with each other. So with that being said, on behalf of VSA, we would like to express our gratitude to T for the tremendous work of sharing her story and for her presence here today.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's the sound? Can you hear me in the back? Great. If I could just do a house note on lights. If we could keep the lights on until I get to the slide that goes all black, and then dim the lights. Then, are you the lights? Who's the lights? Paul. Where's Paul? Oh. Hi, Paul. Not yet. Not yet. When I get to the slide that's all black, that'll be your cue to dim the lights. I just broke down the fourth wall just now. Sorry. I used to be a public high school teacher, like Julie said. I started in New York City, and then I went to Oakland and helped start a school from scratch there. So my public speaking style is scrappy, because I always had to be ready to move rooms really quickly in New York, because space was always an issue. And in Oakland, everything was an issue. So I remember teaching computers class and always having to have a backup plan in case the internet didn't work or the computers didn't work in computer class. Once I taught computer class with no electricity. So hopefully everything's working here today, but if not, I gotcha. The projector's on? Okay. So I can do the lights myself? In a little bit. Which button do I push? Okay. Alrighty. So the best we could do is, as I said the other night, my disclaimer for a project that took me a very long time to do while I was teaching at Oakland International and raising my son. He was 1.5 when we opened the school, and he was, I believe, 11, or maybe, yeah, I think he was 11 when I finished the book. I started drawing the book when he was just a couple of months old. The book took me so long, partly because I was squeezing it in on summer vacation and weekends and an hour or two here and there. It also took me a long time because it was very difficult material for me. I started before I became a parent, and it wasn't until I became a parent. How many of you are parents in the room? Okay, yeah, you're sitting in the back. I love that. It wasn't until I crossed over that line to becoming a parent that I felt capable of telling my parents' stories, because it opened up an empathy in me that I don't think I had before. I was able to put myself in their shoes in a different way than I had before. Before it was theoretical, and then when I became a mother myself and was responsible for another life, for the rest of its life, then I realized that there is no way on earth that you don't screw up that job. And that's, I think, where the title actually comes from. So I'm a child of parents just like everybody else, but the specifics of my story involve an immigration, a boat journey, a civil war, the fall of a country. And so I had to go back and tell those things. Many young Vietnamese Americans are often not sure if they want to read my story at first because they don't know if they want to be attached yet again to the Vietnam War. Actually, I haven't gotten that from you all, and I think that's a testament to like the quality of the conversations that have happened before I came here. But a lot of people, a lot of young folks don't want to be connected to this war anymore. They say, we're us. Can't we move on? Can't we be something else? Can't we be weird or funny or just like to, crack jokes and be like everybody else? And I say yes. If you are in an MFA in writing program and your professors are all trying to make you write about the Vietnam War, definitely give them the middle finger. But I will also say that if you don't know your history, you don't ever really have a chance to know yourself. And so I happen to come from this in-between generation that knows a lot about what happened before and also went through what happened afterwards. And so my gift to, or what I can offer is that perspective and that historical foundation that is told through the lens of a Vietnamese American person and not of a white American male scholar, for example. And that is so important. That's all we had for a while, and it made it so that so many of our lived experiences went untold, unrecognized, and then misunderstood. So whatever I can do to rectify that situation, I'm happy to do. And it is in the guise of a very personal family story, because ultimately history is just the story of people. And these people happen to be very close to me. So I'm going to show you a little bit of the book. Can I get a sense of who has not read the book yet? Oh, okay, great. So this is going to be familiar, but hopefully the act of reading it out loud will change your reading a little bit or just entertain you maybe. These are my sisters on the left. We're going to use their fake names. These are not their real names. I changed everyone's name who's living to give them a little bit of privacy. So my sisters, Lan and Bic. Really important to remember the pronunciation of Bic. My mother, who was 8 months pregnant when we got on a boat to escape Vietnam. My father, who I call Bo in the story, and 3-year-old me. And this is us in 1978. And as my mother says, it is 99% true. So I don't want to do all the voices. I think it'll be better with some audience voices. So I've actually got some plants in the audience who've agreed ahead of time to help me with this. One of them doesn't know that he's doing it, actually, Tai Kai. Did they tell you that they volunteered you? Great, okay. So, Tak, you're going to be playing the crucial role of my father as a young man, as an older man, and if you wouldn't mind, you're also doing the sound effects. Great. And sound effects in comics can be read simultaneously with speaking, but you're sharing one mic, so I'm going to leave it up to you about how you want to do that. In comics, we generally read left to right and top to bottom, as if we're reading Western comics. Okay, Mohammed, you're going to be playing Bo's grandfather, a very dapper gentleman, and this bit part as a neighbor. Caroline, hi. Caroline has the daunting task of playing Bo's grandmother, this bit part as her roommate, my sister Lan, my mother Ma, my other sister Bic, and me. All right, you're going to be great. So, I'm going to take you across time and space to a South Vietnam that no longer exists. The year is 1955. The French have lost their last stronghold in Southeast Asia after a long and deadly war. The international powers that be have divided former Indochina, or Vietnam, into two countries temporarily at the 17th parallel, creating a problem for the Vietnamese who live on either side of this new boundary. People in the south who want to follow Ho Chi Minh move to the north, and people in the north who are terrified of a communist uprising leave the north and move to the south. And in 1955, my father, who was 14 years old at the time, finds himself on one of the great ships sent by the US to transport people from the north to the south. Imagine the awe and excitement that I felt for New York when I moved there after college. Must be something like what my father felt when he arrived in Saigon in 1955. Bo and his grandfather were two bachelors exploring the big city. Money in their pockets, freedom on their minds. They strolled down Grand Avenues, ate at restaurants,
Cargoon.
and visited friends and relatives. When his grandfather wanted some time away from him,
Here's some money. Go see a movie.
Bo's grandmother arrived in Saigon separately on the last of the great ships from the north.
Grandma.
Let's make a new home together.
No, I don't need you.
Bo's grandmother rented a flat with two other women.
This way, Auntie.
But fate would soon drive her back to her unfaithful husband. The South had a new prime minister named Ngo Dinh Diem, who had yet to establish full control of the region. Saigon had its own mafia called the Binh Xuyen, who controlled the casinos, the brothels, and the drug trade. Diem's forces fought the Binh Xuyen in the streets of Saigon. One night, the fighting came right to the doorstep of Bo's grandmother.
Ah, my opium jars. Stay down.
Pow. Plunk.
With her securities gone and scared of more violence, Bo's grandmother agreed to go back to her cheating husband.
Huh? Grandma?
And Bo had a family again. They pulled their money together and bought a little house for the equivalent of $5,000.
5,000 seems pretty cheap for a house in the capital.
It was really just the space between two other houses.
Wait, I've got paper. Can you draw it for me?
Someone had tapped it with a roof made of palm leaves. Inside, they lined it with cardboard to give it the resemblance of a house. But to me, at age 14, it was a home, an address.
This is the house I lived in, only a lot later.
Yes, but by that time, they had added another story to it. It was still small and dirty. Do you remember it?
No, I was too little. My first home.
I went to see the old house with my family in 2001, the time that Bo refused to go. Travis and I were newlyweds. I had a short impulsive haircut. The street had changed beyond recognition. Miraculously, an old neighbor still lived there, recognized my mother, and came out to talk to us.
Aren't you Nam's wife? That's your house.
Oh, I thought it was that one.
That was Mr. Khan's house.
Mr. and Mrs. Gan lived in that one.
No, that's Mrs. Dwao.
He's right, Ma. That's right, but this is our house.
We each had our own reaction to this homecoming. Lan already scouting ahead. Ma and Bic the most excited. Me and Thumb documenting in low of remembering. We didn't know the people there, and we didn't go inside. And even standing right in front of our old house, I had to rely on other people's stories to remember or to even picture what it was like when we lived there.
I think this is the same shop where occasionally we would get a cigarette or two for Dad. This is where we learned to ride our bikes without hitting any of the vendors. This is the old coffee house where we would go out every day with our little glass and bring back some coffee for Dad, with the condensed milk, laced with opium. Smelled really good.
Lan and Bic remember an alley where a friend lived. A lamppost that Lan walked into while reading. And the sidewalk where Bic beat up a boy for harassing Lan. Lacking memories of my own, I do research. Lots of research.
Hello, T.
I brought you a video I found.
Vietnam War with Walter Cronkite.
The narration is only okay. But what I thought was neat was seeing footage of our old neighborhood.
Really? Thank you, Bo.
If you like it, I'll get you more.
5 days after the combat began, the enemy was still fighting. George Severson described the battle in one of Saigon's slums.
This neighborhood is called Ban Kur, or the chessboard, because of the maze of alleys and passageways. Its residents are mostly poor working people, and its slums are a refuge for Saigon's hoodlum and criminal elements. A Southeast Asian version of the Lower East Side or the Algerian Casbah.
Man, I know this is caricature, but lacking memories of my own, I have to depend on other people's stories.
The Lower East Side. I'll draw it like that.
I still have the chessboard my father made when I was a kid and the wooden set of pieces that we played with. revisiting this game of war and strategy, I think about how none of the Vietnamese people in that video have a name or a voice. My grandparents, my parents, my sisters, and me, we weren't any of the pieces on the chessboard. We were more like ants, scrambling out of the way of giants, getting just far enough away from danger to resume the business of living. Thank you, and thank you especially to Mohammed, Taik, and Caroline for reading with me. I'm going to play you your hero music now. Oop. Oh, it didn't play. Sorry. Here we go. I've been doing this slideshow for a while, and I feel a little bit like Al Gore. And I'm like, how can I spice it up for myself? So I added some music this time, and I'm not sure quite yet if I like it. I think I do. My dream is still to be kind of a DJ with the sound and like be able to improvise more with it. But we had some technical difficulties earlier. But I do like conventions. Like, did you notice, like, when the lights went back on and the music was playing, you kind of wanted to get up out of your seat, right? And go to, like, you wanted to leave, because this is how we are programmed. And so this is actually one of the things that I really love about comics, too, because there are all kinds of conventions built into the way that we read comics that maybe we're so used to that we don't even think about them. But when you get to play around with them, it's really quite fun. I'll let you in on a couple of secrets. One of them is at the bottom right-hand corner. If you want to close out a scene and get your reader ready to move on to a new scene, you just pan out into a wide shot, and they're ready. It's kind of like turning the lights back on and playing an outro song. And these are the things that keep us drawing. I obviously like to laugh more than I like to cry. I only like to make you cry in the privacy of your home while reading my book, and that is another thing that I love about comics. Yesterday, I feel like I said something about comics where I was comparing them to movies, and I may have been a little bit flippant when I said if I could make movies instead of comics, I would. It's not true. I was thinking about what's special about a comic book, and it's that it's a book. And if you think about the physicality of watching a film with like the multi-sensory experience that is a film, right? You're sitting in the dark, so you forget your own body, but then you're immersed in this experience that's loud and has like moving images. It's a really physical experience. But then if you think about the physicality of a book, it's very intimate. You're holding the story literally in your hands. And that is a very, very different experience. Even if you get lost in a book, the same way that you get lost in a movie, there is something kind of magical about that intimacy of holding something in your hands, flipping the pages, or I'm not even against digital, like swiping. You're still holding something in your hands and it's small, and there's something about a miniature that helps us understand big things. Like when you look at a miniature replica of a space or something, you kind of, it's so cute and little, and then you're bigger, and something about that size scale relationship also helps you understand something that maybe is a little bit hard to understand if it's bigger than you. So these are all the things that I love about comics. And we are here to talk about comics. We can also be here to talk about refugee stories of yesterday and today. I have a couple of things I would love to share with you from my more recent work. And I'm also happy to answer anybody's questions. Julie, could you give us a sense of how much time we have?
So we've got about 25 minutes.
25 minutes is a luxurious amount of time. So we're going to start with giving the mic to students first. And if I find a good moment to jump in with some of the other work I want to share with you, then I'll do that too. So Julie's going to walk around with a microphone. And is the sound still okay? All right, great.
So my question is, I think one of the things you talked about at your talk yesterday was about the importance of exposure of different stories, of different histories, and I think just how important it is for us to be able to recognize our identities and how they kind of shape who we are. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, what are your thoughts towards how identity plays into, and knowledge of identity plays into creating positive change, not only for our own communities, but for communities outside of ourselves?
Yeah. I always get disturbed when people use the word identity with the word politics, because it then turns something really beautiful and empowering into something divisive. And so I always push back when anybody uses the term identity politics, because that's not what we're about. We're about trying to help young people navigate a complicated world and a changing country. And what better way to do that than to know yourself? And the idea that we're all the same is lovely, but not true. It's a little bit trying to be colorblind or pretend that we're all the same because we want to be the same is a little bit like a kid playing hide and seek with you, where they cover their own eyes and then they imagine that they are invisible. It's cute. I don't know that it's going to get us far in the discourse. So I think that we need to move into a kind of discourse that is maybe more honest, more authentic, not aggressive. We can still be compassionate and caring and considerate of others as we are more frank about our differences and inequity that exists. So in terms of finding ways to support others, I think that as we become more aware of who we are in relationship to others, then we can also pay attention to who we're speaking to. For a long time, writers like myself would write for an imaginary white audience, and that is a pressure that actually came from publishing. If you were a minority writer, you wrote in translation. You translated yourself and your culture and your experience to a dominant culture, and you're expected to meet the standards of that culture. I now write for a plurality, which means that I don't assume that there is a dominant culture. The only thing that I assume is English, because I don't really know a workaround. English is my best language. It's the language that I dream in, and so I write in it too. However, I do speak other languages, and the story happens in other languages. So my pushback against the dominance of English was to insist on having a font that had all of the diacritical marks on the Vietnamese. And it's easy, because I made my own font from my handwriting, And now open typeface fonts have space for over 1,000 characters. So there's plenty of space for Vietnamese to be written properly so that readers of Vietnamese know how to actually pronounce the words. When I was growing up, the diacritical markers were always taken out, so you still had to guess how the names were pronounced. And then I don't translate everything. I know that there are readers out there who think that Bo is his name, but I think that readers also have room to grow and learn. So Juno Diaz uses a lot of Spanish that's untranslated in his texts, and that's something that happened a lot less, maybe 30 years ago. So as a country, we're changing in so many ways, and I think it's for the better. I do think that I have to be conscious when I go to different universities to understand the student population too. Like talking to a school in the Pacific Northwest is of course really different from talking to a school in the South. And I have to understand where Asian Americans fit in different parts of the country and how much or how little people know about Asian American history so that I know how to find the connections with other folks. I can't assume anything. Does that answer your question?
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I know I had a chance to ask a question early, but I couldn't think of any at the time. Thank you for being here so much, honestly. Anyways, I have a question. You mentioned refugees, refugee work, something along those lines. So I myself actually am a son of immigrants and also the grandson of refugees from Palestine. And pretty much my question is for you is, have you done or are you hoping to do some collaborative work with refugee authors or refugee agencies, considering, you know, some of your story is, well, on the arts, but at the same time, it's also a refugee story?
Yeah, actually, there's an anthology of essays called The Displaced that I have a couple of illustrations in. And it's edited by the author of The Sympathizer, Viet Thanh Nguyen. And it has essays by refugee writers from many, many different backgrounds, Hungarian, Ethiopian, Iraqi, many, many different stories from different generations, talking about their personal experiences and also politicizing it a little bit. And all of the profits from the sales of that book go to the International Rescue Committee. So it's a great book. Another organization that I'm working with right now is Asian Americans Advancing Justice - Asian Law Caucus. And something I do on the side, just because I'm trying to, I feel a dire need to level up in terms of my involvement with activism. So one thing I realized is that in the last couple of years, I've done a lot of independent work with various organizations, and I think it's because I feel comfortable moving into the world of like political science and social science more than some of my peers in the arts. So in the last couple of years, I've developed all these friends who are organizers and lawyers, and then I still have all these friends who are cartoonists, and I realized I could just like bring them to the same party. So I started this thing, I'm just loosely calling it an art hack. We've had a couple so far, they're once a month. And I just set up a meeting ahead of time with a local organization that is doing great work and that could use some help. And then I invite artists that I know to come to it. And it's a 2-hour meeting. The model is really simple. The organization buys dinner, and the artists come and they get a debriefing from somebody who's knowledgeable on an issue. And then they have a chance to offer ideas and then volunteer or come up with an idea on the spot. It's kind of like a writer's room, like a TV writer's room, but we're trying to make something. And so in those 2 hours, they brainstorm like maybe 3 ideas, break into small groups, flesh out the idea with each other, and then commit to executing the idea in the next week or 2. So the first one we did, we came up with 3 or 4 visual PSAs, around the public charge issue, which is it's a rule change that affects immigrants by scaring them away from using public services because it threatens their immigration status. The second one that we just did was around the Muslim ban, which is now 2 years old. So we just passed the second anniversary of the first Muslim ban. And I am so excited to share this with you because it actually hasn't gone online yet. I have to post it. But you get to see it off my computer. Let's see. I got Raina Telgemeier to come to this meeting, and she's finishing her book right now. But she really wanted to level up her involvement too. So she agreed to draw this 8-panel comic. Another artist wrote the script, and I lettered and colored it. And we all did this completely unpaid. I don't know that I would actually take on a commission like this because it would feel unethical. But the reason I do this is I want to show people what's possible when we bring our strengths to the table. I think maybe sometimes if you're concerned about things that are happening in the country right now and you focus on the bad news, it can be overwhelming. But coming from a country that, you know, fell apart and coming from a refugee background where you saw your parents start over from nothing is actually kind of empowering because you realize that you can rebuild a life from nothing. So certainly in this country where we have First Amendment rights and a still pretty free press and social media tools and iPhones and all this cool stuff, you can do so much. And I find that really exciting. If you'd like to see some of my published stuff that has to do with refugees and people in danger of deportation, it is all on my website. Just Google Thi Bui, and it's all here on the front page. Precious Time is a short comic that I did tying the refugee experience of Vietnamese Americans to the current situation of folks trying to leave Syria and Somalia, who are also boat people. I'm trying to get permission to go into a refugee camp in Greece on the island of Lesbos. There's a camp called Moria that was built for 3,000 people, and it now has over 9,000. So it's in the news because it might get shut down because the sanitation problem is like so awful. And yet it's in this it's on this paradise island, and I find that contradiction so crazy that I want to go there and make something, but it's a little bit complicated. I'll let you know if it happens.
So I was really interested in the way that the book was had a non-linear timeline.
Sorry, could you say that louder?
Yeah, can you hear me now? So I was interested in the way that the best we could do is a non-linear or time doesn't really work in the way that you expect it to. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, whether the conception of the idea was in that way, or if you decided to disrupt time, or just what the experience of ordering it was like.
I think I wanted to be transparent about the process of trying to reconstruct memory. And I was also thinking a lot about how I accessed the story. So like I said earlier, the pivotal moment for me was becoming a mother and that opening up my empathy for my parents. And so I figured, why not take the reader right there? So I always knew how the story was going to begin and how it was going to end with those first few hours of motherhood. And everything in between was a moving backwards in time. And so the moment of empathy is me becoming a mother in the very physical process of going through labor, and admitting to myself that it was really hard. It was the hardest thing that I had ever done, and yet I was doing it in a first world country with, state-of-the-art equipment and doctors and lots of things to support me. So that is classic, like, child of survivor guilt. And it made me think really hard about something I knew but didn't really think about before, which is that my mother went through 6 of those in much harder circumstances. So I think that there's something that we as humans do that's very easy, which is that we take other people's experiences that are so extreme and we abstract them into something that we just consume. And when we consume the news about people, a caravan of migrants crossing Mexico and coming here, we can somehow turn that horrific journey that they're going through into something that scares us in our living rooms. So I suppose trying to be more transparent about how a story is constructed, and it starts with you, to tell a true story, you should start with you, and you should peel away the layers of you till you get to the other person, and that's true empathy. I guess I was more interested in that than telling a chronological story. I'll say one more thing about that. Immigrant stories are often told in chronological order, and I think the downside of that is that the climax is always, they come to America, and they lived happily ever after, which is a cute story, but not always true, and not a particularly useful story to keep telling.
Another question. Oh, I see a hand.
So as an artist, making something that's very personal is a very scary and daunting thing, especially when you're giving a perspective that may not be received well. So when making this book, has there been it sounds like a really scary thing to do, especially sharing it. What kind of experience have you had with the reception of it? Is there any aspect of where you feel like you need to distance yourself from it or anything?
No, it's been really surprising, I first of all, I did not expect it to be so relevant to current events when it came out. I figured that I would be talking about the refugee crisis coming out of Syria, but then the presidential election happened and everything went nuts. And then suddenly I was talking more directly about xenophobia. And now I'm tasked with the job of humanizing immigrants and refugees, which is wow, it's a big job. So if I shy away from anything, it's the notion that I can speak for everybody. I just try to speak for myself, but I happen to have a story that's similar to a lot of people's stories, and I don't shy away from my similarity to other people's stories. Having worked with undocumented minors from Latin American countries, I don't see any difference between their story and mine, and in a lot of cases, they're running away from situations that were more dire than mine, but I happened to get refugee status and they didn't, and that's just a geopolitical thing, and quite arbitrary. I have had people tell me, warn me to try to not burn any bridges or, try to be less political. And I worried at first, but then I'm like, I just can't keep my mouth shut. And I think it's maybe because I'm not coming in with an agenda. I'm not trying to change the way you vote in the next election. And I don't have a 10-point agenda of ways in which I want to change you. I'm just telling my story and opening up avenues for discussion in a very broad way. And I hope that I speak to people's hearts rather than their wallets or, you know, something more transactional. So the reception has been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm not sorry at all that I'm a blabbermouth about current events. In some ways, I think maybe I could be more bold and direct, but I also am respectful of differences in opinion and the various stories of how people get to their political beliefs. So I don't like to talk at anybody. I'd rather have dialogue.
Hi. I was wondering if you had any advice in general or more direct for aspiring authors and possibly aspiring comic book or graphic novelists.
So to add to what I said the other night about becoming somebody who finishes things, also finding a community that keeps you accountable and keeps you inspired is also really important. I don't think I probably wouldn't have finished the book, or I wouldn't have been happy with the book had I not found a community of cartoonists to teach me how to do comics. And I'm finding that these days too. I spent a couple of years where I just sort of I got impatient with other cartoonists because they weren't activist enough, and so I just went and hung out with civil rights lawyers, which was fun for a bit. But then my artist got lonely because the lawyers didn't know how to give me any feedback on my work other than the content, and what their feedback was always to add more words. But you don't want to do that in comics because then it becomes text heavy and dense, and you're missing much of the magic of the medium. So I think finding a balance of different kinds of people to read your work and give you feedback on it is really important too. And then also leaving yourself room to play so that you don't miss out on the magic. There is a lot of magic that goes into making things, and I don't know that you can do it well if you don't give yourself time to dream and wonder and look at the world as though nothing has a name. Even when you're being hella activist, you should, give yourself some time to dream too.
Hi, thank you for being here. Kind of along the same lines of putting yourself out there, we know you use pseudonyms for your family. Did you ever consider using a pseudonym for yourself? And do you believe not using a pseudonym has made a more powerful impact on your graphic novel?
I definitely thought about how funny it would be to use a pseudonym that made me sound white. That's always an interesting one, because then it really makes people reckon with how much identity does matter. So my name is hard for some, or a lot of people don't know how to pronounce my name, but they learn, and that's how we change. So it's cool. I'm happy being out there in the public, and I know how to keep my privacy in ways that matter to me. People think that when you write a memoir, you've told it all, but when you do memoir, it's a subtractive process because there's all of your life experience, and then you just put in what you chose to tell a particular story. So as much as I revealed, I probably kept hidden twice as much.
I think we have time maybe for one more question. Yes.
You spent some time as a high school teacher, and if I'm not mistaken, that was also a time while you were working on this product, or at least going through the art process.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know how that time, if at all, how it influenced the production of the book.
I was teaching at a high school for recent immigrants and refugees, And because I was yearning to be working on my book, I made them write their immigration stories in the form of comics. And it really wasn't quite fair because I took over 10 years to do mine and I gave them a semester to do theirs. So they were my guinea pigs. I learned a lot about other parts of the world and more recent waves of immigrants and refugees from reading and editing my students' stories. And it gave me a chance to think about how I wanted to frame mine. And it also gave me perspective, which is nice to have when you're writing something so personal. How do you keep it from becoming navel-gazily? And history has given me that from high above perspective that I find helpful.
Great. Well, thank you so much, T, for being with us this week, and especially our experience here with you today. If you could join me in thanking T for being with us.